more relaxed. There's not a lot of mechanisms going on. We're talking about the organisms and how they relate first. And then we're gonna talk, so this next, I'm not gonna do bacteria because we're gonna cover bacteria so much later that I'm just gonna let them go. And we're just gonna cover mycology, the study of fungi. We're gonna cover parasitology. We'll look at parasitology from a single cell parasite, protozoan, multicellular parasite, metazoan, and an exoparasite, the organisms that are on the outside of the body, okay? Then we'll go into talking about viruses, and viruses will take me about 2 lecture periods because there's a lot of stuff to talk about, including I'll give you updates on COVID and where we stand. Right now, a lot of people are tired of COVID. I think it's important that we understand the mechanism and understand where we're at so that we can continue to understand that it's gonna be a problem for a little while, okay? Then that's the end of Unit 3. You will take the Unit 3 exam as a cohort, so as in your group. You're going to have the same grade, unless somebody doesn't work, and Isabella says, you are not working, then they have to go off by themselves and do their own work, okay? Yep.
How exactly does that work?
What do you mean?
Like we don't get a packet and we just talk amongst our group
Correct.
over the answers?
Correct.
Okay.
Or, I mean, there's other strategies.
No,
If
that's
it-
fine.
if-
I was just
if-
curious
This
as
is
to how.
trans group.
Huh?
I need to, me and Trev need to do together.
You're not taking her from us.
I don't think they're gonna give up Tram. But your group is just beautiful together, I think. But anyway, what I would do is, if I'm the leader of a group, I would say, these are my peeps, right? I'd say, hey Carla, I want you to show you're an expert on mycology. Jen, I want you to cover all the single celled and multicellular protozoa. Eric, I want you to know the exoparasites as vectors is also parasites, and I will cover everything virology, and then we synergize. That's what I would do.
Can we do the rest of
Huh?
them? Can we do the rest of them like that?
No, just one. And the reason I do this exam this way is because I've been to many lectures about how you get students involved. And you know, I'm all about community. And so this is a whole bunch of information. You're not gonna retain most of it. If you retain just 4% of it, I'm happy. So I'm more interested in seeing how you work in a group together under pressure. Yeah.
Will that be in class?
Yep.
All right.
You wanna do it outside of class?
I was just
No.
curious, and closed book in class, is that how it works?
That's negotiable.
Oh, is that right?
Well, then it's not gonna help you one bit,
I
right?
wish I would've
Close
had a
note,
book though.
It's negotiable.
Okay. And what, we have 4 lecture tests, is that accurate? And then-
5.
We have 5 lecture tests plus the
We're almost
project?
done.
But the project is not mandatory. You do not have to do it. Why are you making noises over here?
Does the project replace one of the 5?
Huh?
The project replaces one of the 5, or is it
Yes.
5 plus 1?
1 to 5. So if you have a bad day,
Yeah.
project take its place.
Right.
Good? Yes, Jess.
The unknown, is it for lab or is it for lecture?
Unknown is for lab.
Well, it's all one big grade, isn't it? Like, everything's graded.
It's one
the
big
same
grade, but,
grade book.
but I do it differently. That's why you can't see the total points you earn, because it doesn't work that way with me. I do it by percentage. The lecture is 70% of your grade, and the lab is 30% of the grade. You cannot make an A in the course without doing well in the lab. Okay? But usually the lab lifts people up, right? So you're like, oh, and then the lab comes in, oh, and lifts you up, makes you better.
I know how to study for the lab this time.
Okay? Anybody else have questions? All right, let's go. The fungi, to me, are my favorite group of organisms that are not animals or plants, right? And the reason that is because we are much like them, right? We are eukaryotic, they are eukaryotic. We do not undergo photosynthesis, neither do they. They produce a lot of different enzymes to take in nutrients, so do we, right? They produce molecules to protect themselves from being destroyed. We do also. We have an immune system, right? Now their system is a little bit different, but we are very closely related to them in everything we do, right? And so therefore, we are aligned with them closer than we are to plants, closer than we are to the bacteria. And so we are aligned with them pretty well, right? So if we think about them, they're all chemoheterotrophs. They have to consume something else in order to survive. They don't have mouths. So what they do is they release exoenzymes. They break down the structures of these chemicals outside of the body, and they bring them into the cell, okay? They are all multicellular except for the yeast. The yeast are single-celled organisms, right? Most of them are filamentous, or that means that they have filaments, right? And some of them produce fleshy parts. So if we think about the three groups of the fungi, the yeast, single-celled, you can tell them easy because they're single-celled and they bud. The molds, they're filamentous, their mycela, their vegetative structures look very distinct. I'll talk about them in a minute. And then the macroscopic organisms are fleshy, right? So a lot of them have very hard structures or sometimes soft structures that you can push on, pull apart, or do whatever, okay? So they're pretty interesting to think about. They absorb their nutrients. The fungi can reproduce asexually and sexually. They would prefer to reproduce sexually, make a whole bunch of clones of themselves, because it doesn't take them much energy to do so. But given the right conditions, they're stressed out. They will reproduce sexually, because what's the purpose of having sex?
To relieve
It
stress.
opens up the gene pool, and therefore, what did you say?
I said to relieve stress.
Okay, so Samantha, we are the only group of organisms, the animals, that have sex for pleasure or to relieve stress. Kick in the endorphins.
Dolphins too.
I was just
Well, I
gonna
know
say
dolphins do, dolphins.
Yeah.
But I said the animals as a whole, right?
Those monkeys in the zoo look.
The monkeys do also.
X-rated
Right.
sometimes.
I watched a monkey one time at the zoo, and he had sex four times in like 15 minutes.
And you're
I'm
like,
like,
whoa.
Child friendly.
And the turtles were doing it.
Yeah.
I had an amazing video. And the kids go, oh, look, they're hugging. And I was like,
That's
yeah,
exactly what they're
that's a
doing.
Great hug.
Yeah, that's
Come on,
exactly
let's
what
go see
they're
the monkeys.
So the fungi only reproduce sexually when they're stressed, and stress to them is no nutrients, okay? So they're interesting to think about. They do not produce embryos. That's how we're different, right? We produce an embryo, and so they do not, okay? So they're really quite beautiful. Here is a soil-dwelling fungus that makes traps for nematodes. So you can see that the nematode crawls through these little hoops in the soil, and then the fungus captures it, and it digests the nematode alive. Isn't that cool?
I didn't realize.
So they have so many different mechanisms by which they interact with nature, how they do things.
Am I
right?
supposed to know what a nematode is?
Yeah, it's an earthworm.
Oh.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
But there's a lot of other worms that are nematodes. They're roundworms. They're true worms. Yes, ma'am.
So that hyphal loop, is that a part of them? Is a part of their?
That's the vegetative structure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Isn't that cool?
So that's a yeast eating a worm.
No, it is a mold digesting a worm.
And this is a dead worm. It's not.
No, it's
actually
alive.
a live worm.
It has crawled through those little loops and got caught by it. Isn't that cool?
Yeah. Wow.
So most people think of nematodes as just earthworms, big old things. A lot of them are microscopic. They're little tiny.
I had a fungus at the station in my house once, and I bought little nematodes that look just like a powder, and I put in my house plants.
They eat everything. Yep.
In consuming the nematode, does that make them carnivorous?
Yes, it would, but I never think of it that way. I just think of it as Okay. So a lot of them form association with the tips of roots for other plants, right? And so if we want to grow orchids, we can't grow orchids by just bringing orchids and planting it in the soil. We have to bring the soil with it, because the fungi are in the soil, right? And how do we know this? Well, because in the United States, we try to have an orchid industry, and the orchid industry would never take off until they hired a microbiologist. And he said, the reason they're not growing is because the fungi aren't here. So we went back to Costa Rica, and Puerto Rico brought some soil over here, And now we have a healthy orchid industry in the United States. By the way, orchids don't really belong here, so, I'm not real crazy about them, but a lot of people like them. So how do I say no, especially when they're in H-E-B now, right? It's amazing. They're used as food, they're used in religious ceremonies, right? So some First Nations people and some other people that I know will take shrooms and they'll get to an altered state. And the First Nations people believe that it allows them to interact with their elders, and the elders will give them direction about how they should take the tribe, right? My friends who do shrooms, they just like it for the euphoric sensation, right, and how they feel, right? But none of them are in the medical field. They're all kind of doing their own thing, and so they can do those kind of things. If you test positive for shrooms or any other drug, marijuana, in Texas, you will not get your license. Careful. Okay?
Some professional license?
Like ever? You turn into like a,
You get blackballed.
yeah, a black hole.
How long do shrooms stay in your system?
I don't know.
I've never seen a test. I've never
It's
seen
not
a
very
test for
long.
shrooms.
I haven't, yeah.
Like they usually have a.
We have
It's
them.
They test for everything. I've never seen
We
it.
have
Yeah, it's just like the
What?
generic test that they do, and then that's included in it.
Usually they test urine, they can test blood for THC. But if they wanna look further, they can take some of your hair because it stays in your hair longer. Yep.
This is gonna go so off topic, but
Do it.
my mom's really good friend has been an alcoholic for like her whole life, and she started doing, we're from Oregon, so she started doing psilocybin treatment.
Oh
and
my goodness.
It changed her life. She
Yeah.
wasn't drinking.
It can change your whole thought pattern.
Yeah, so it's
True.
psilocybin.
Oh.
So then I started like looking at it and kind of like, I don't know if anyone's ever read The Omnivore's Dilemma. It's a really interesting book, but.
I mean, they're used to treat migraines, they're used for a
Yeah.
lot of different
Like, so
things.
then I was like, oh my gosh,
But,
there's so
but
many.
at dilutions that are not, because
Oh,
you.
super small, yeah,
you-
where people are.
So I
yeah.
wanna caution people that when you engage with shrooms, there's a very small therapeutic window
Yes.
to which it is euphoric.
2 grams.
But also, because it's different from everybody, because everybody has a different physiology, to where it can be toxic.
Yeah.
So I have a friend who works here who I went to high school with. I'm not gonna tell you her name. But she got high at one party with shrooms, and we thought she was gonna die. So we put her in the car, we rushed her down to the hospital, and they wanted our names. We didn't wanna give our names. Oh, we're just her friend. We need your name to help. And the word clerk was just like asking things, and like, well, we're just her friend. We just brought her here.
We just found her at the curb.
And then she kept trying to get our names. We wouldn't give her our names. And then she looked up. She goes, "Where is she?" And we all looked at each other. No. So we went over looking. We found her in the cafeteria.
Oh my God.
She had taken off all her clothes, and she was running around saying she was Tinkerbell. I'm
Oh my
Tinkerbell.
God.
This is a true story.
Like in a calm sort of tinker.
No, in a very
Is there
excited
any
manner.
kind of-
Excited delirium. It was just shrooms?
Well, I don't know if it was just shrooms,
Yeah.
because we quickly, after the ward clerk and the orderly caught her, the rest of us snuck out of the hospital.
Yeah, gotta go.
Yeah, so, yeah. And then her father called me and said, "Do you know anything about this?" I said, "I'm not sure I know what you're talking about."
I don't even know what that is.
I read this research paper one time, and I actually read it because of personal experience. And it was talking about how hallucinogenics can sometimes bring forth a suppressed mental illness in people.
Yes.
So we have a family friend who he went to college. He's a year younger than we are, and
No.
we are assuming that he got
It's
into
like
some
mild
stuff.
compared
We had some people tell us it might have been shrooms, and he now has schizophrenia.
What's happened to my cousin?
He might have already.
And he's like super off the deep end,
Kind of
like
already.
really bad.
I
But
think
no,
what
he was
happens
totally normal.
is they have
Absolutely
the underlying
normal.
genes
Might
and
have
then
already.
Yeah,
the
and it
drugs
brings it
will,
out.
will bring it out, cause that's my cousin's turned on.
He was like,
schizophrenic and that
he was
happens
like,
to
so
him.
there's 4 kids in total, and he was the good kid. He was the one that made all A's and did everything right, and now you could look at him, he's lost like 100 pounds, and like, he's talks to people that aren't there, and it's super,
Sometimes it's better to not experience certain things, right?
I didn't know if that was like an actual thing. I just read a research paper over, it was in like Utah, that like a college student had written or something, and talking about how some hallucinogenics can bring out like mental illnesses in people they didn't know they had.
So
think
this
that's
friend
what
of mine
we
is
do.
here, and
Mhm.
sometimes she'll get mad at me and she'll start to say certain things, and I'll say, okay, Tink. She goes, you're not supposed to, you promised you would not. I said, "Hey, you better
That
leave me
was her-
alone, and you better not give me any more
That
grief,
was her
because I'm just
childhood
gonna,
dream. She
I'm
wanted
just
to be
gonna keep
Tinkerbell.
calling you Tink.
That's
right?
funny.
So I got something on her, right? So here are morels, and the morels are really delicious. This is a bird nest fungus. I put this here because one spring, 6 months ago, I was walking in the park, and the bird nest fungi were everywhere. I had never seen so many in my life. They were everywhere. I was taking pictures, and people were coming, oh, why are you taking pictures of the ground? I'm like, no, it's the bird nest, and they all kind of thought it was weird, right? But these things were everywhere, and they're quite beautiful to think about. Almost all of the fungi are aerobic, except the yeast. They can be fermentative. So if you take away their oxygen, you kill them completely. Remember this. We've already talked about anaerobic and facultatively anaerobic and anaerobic. But remember this, because I'm gonna make scenarios for the exam, and if you don't understand how to put things together, it's gonna be difficult to answer.
So you said
questions.
almost all of the fungi are aerobic,
Aerobic.
some are anaerobic.
The fungi that are facultatively anaerobic or fermentative are the yeast.
Is that? Sorry.
So here are the 3 different groups. Here are the yeast. These are mold, right? This is a plate that would represent a plate that I put out here for 30 minutes one day, right out here on this railing. We brought it back in, we incubated it, and it grew over 180 different species of molds. So, Central Texas, Austin, is the allergy capital of the world.
And don't we know it?
There are more allergens in the air in this area than any place else because of humidity, because of the ocean bringing up these real moist environments, and because of the way the jet stream hits down here. And so there's always something in the air. But if you'll notice, there's grasses and trees and all kinds of things, but when it rains, all those things get suppressed, but the moles go crazy. And then you have a lot of mold. So after it rains, if you see all of the allergens are way down except the moles are off the chart, right? And that's because all they need is a little bit of water to go crazy.
So you think in Fort Myers is going crazy right now?
Fort Myers?
Where it flooded and with the hurricane and stuff?
Oh, I'm gonna show you some pictures of after a hurricane in just a little bit. Yes,
Why do like plants, like whenever I water my plants, my house plants, I like get mold, or it looks like mold
On the soil, the
on
white?
the soil, yeah.
because of the moisture.
Okay.
That's normal.
Okay.
You don't wanna fight that.
Okay.
Unless they're causing the roots to rot. But that means you're putting too much water on your plant anyway.
We use neem oil, which is natural. on top
Like
of
just like a
soil.
little fuzz.
It's,
Yeah,
yeah.
I have that too.
Okay. Oh, and so here, of course, so you got yeast, you got molds, and this is a mushroom. This is a stinkhorn. A stinkhorn emits an odor like poo. And it's like, oh my God. And so it attracts flies and beetles. The flies and beetles come in there and they land and they're like, where's lunch? And they walk around, lunch. No lunch. Where's the lunch? But they did exactly what the mushroom wanted them to do. They walked around their lamella, the gills, and they picked up all the spores, and then they jump up and they go fly away mad because they didn't get lunch. And they land on Isabella's sandwich and drop off the spores.
Oh, God. Why does it have to be my
Oh,
sandwich?
because you looked at me like you laughed at me and said, I'll take it.
think.
Okay, so if we think about the yeast, right, they undergo mitosis as all eukaryotes do. So you can see right here, this one cell has undergone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 mitotic divisions that I can count. So these are the bud scars. You see the bud scars right here? So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 1, 8, and there's another 9. 9 different mitotic divisions.
Wow.
So it's not like a bacterial cell where the bacterial cell undergoes binary fission and 1 becomes 2. This is mitotic. They produce a bud. They release another daughter cell from the mother cell, but the mother cell continues to survive. Yeah.
Why is that one called a parent cell if it's attached to the one that has a bud?
Because the parent cell is what's giving rise to a new cell, a daughter cell.
Okay.
So it's called a parent cell or a mother cell.
So even though it's coming off of another parent cell, it's still, you see where I'm talking about?
Yeah, so that cell is giving rise to that one.
Okay.
So basically that middle one can be a bud and a parent cell.
Correct.
The bud scars are after it's fallen off? right?
After it's been released.
So the daughter cell's released from the mother cell.
Correct. Anybody else have questions? All right, here we go. So these are moles, and the moles are those stuff that you see that are all fuzzy. Are you with me? Sometimes when you think about it, you might want an orange, and you're like, oh, I have oranges in the refrigerator. So you go to the refrigerator, you open up the crisper, and there's the orange, but it's all green. Are you with me? And like, what the hell? Well, because the mold like acidic conditions, right? And so here are what we call the vegetative structures. The vegetative structures are called mycelia. So the mycelia will be all that fuzzy, fluffy stuff that's growing off of the mold, right? Sometimes you can see them growing on your oranges or whatever. Sometimes you see them growing on bread. And with the bread mold grows so quickly that if you look at it one afternoon and you see just a little bit of fuzziness, and you're like, I'll just clean out part of it tomorrow. You come back the next morning, it's completely covered the bread, right? Because it moves so quickly.
You said the mycelia was a vegetative structure?
Mhm. So here they are. There are 2 different types of mycelia. The mycelia can be cenocytic or aseptate. That means it has multiple nuclei, but no separations within the structure itself. Right here.
Say it one more time, please.
So the mycelia can be what we call cenocytic or aseptate, and what that means is there's multiple nuclei in the structure, but there's no separation between the nuclei. Okay? Or it can be septate, and it can have separation between the nuclei. So these are more complicated or more evolved organisms. These are less evolved. These are organisms that would have been a long time ago been considered transitional, but now they just haven't changed in a long, long time, that we just see them as being cenocytic or aseptate. Okay?
Those are the ancient ones?
Correct. Older ones. Good?
Acidic?
Cenocytic.
Cenocytic.
It's C-O-E, that's an E.
And then there's no separation.
What that's aseptic.
Cenocytic. Okay?
And that's the no separation between the nucleus.
Right. And so here you can see the microscopic organisms. The microscopic organisms can be so friable and so dainty that if you just blow on them, they break apart. Right? But they can also be so rugged. This is coming out of a telephone pole.
Is that chicken in the woods?
No, it's not. I'll show you chicken in just a minute. But here you can see it's so rugged. You can go over there and just, and it won't come out, right? So you almost have to cut it out of there. And because this is the reproductive structure. And so therefore, if you cut this out and you paint over, make it anaerobic, that site will die of the mold. But the mold, the vegetative structures, are throughout the entire tree or the entire electrical pole or whatever.
So that's
Okay?
a bud?
Huh? No.
No.
No, those are the reproductive structures.
Okay.
Okay? Good? So here, all fungi grow radially from a beginning or an origination site. So what do I mean by that? So this is a fairy ring. Does everybody know what a fairy ring is? A fairy ring are all of the reproductive mushrooms are growing around the outer portion of the colony of the fungus. So where is the beginning of that fungus?
In the center.
Right there. And the mycelia have gone radially throughout the entire area.
Oh, so this is
And
natural.
the ring used to be smaller, like a little,
Huh?
the ring originally used to be a tiny little thing in the center, and then each successive breeding moves out further and further.
Wow.
And all molds and all macroscopic organisms grow this way, right? So those mushrooms are the reproductive structures. The vegetative structures, which we call what, Tay? Mycelia, are underneath the ground. So if you get inside of that ring and step, underneath one of your feet can be miles of mycelia. Isn't that cool?
And the mycelia don't reproduce.
They do reproduce, they produce other mycelium. But when they're ready to produce spores, they reproduce by putting up these mushrooms and all the spores are produced. And in this case, with this particular species, all that's needed to disseminate their spores is a little bit of a breeze. Right? Ever seen, especially after a rainstorm and you're walking around and you see a big, beautiful mushroom or a puffball, and then all of a sudden, a little bit of wind comes and it's like clouds of spores all over the place, right? Happens with cedar also, but it's not as much fun, right? Because it's just squeezy, right? Questions? So if I said that, Eric, I said that all fungi grow radially from a central location, how much do you know about ringworm?
Fungi, molds, and yeast all do that too? No?
Fungi and the macroscopic organisms and the molds, not the
Not the
yeast.
yeast.
So what do you know about ringworm?
It's not really a worm.
Oh, good, Carol, I like that.
Yeah.
It's a fungus.
Yeah, and they usually look circular like on your feet.
Why do you think?
Right.
Why do you think they look circular?
Yeah.
Because the middle of the fungus is right there, and the mycelia are growing radially, and so the new growth is occurring on the edges. You can see the papules where the new growth is occurring, right? Isn't that cool? To think about that general theme of they grow radially from the initiation site where they entered your skin or where they entered the ground. It's just a beautiful thing. My next door neighbor, his yard is lucky, there's a lot of mushrooms that grow in it. And he's out there kicking them all the time. I'm like, why are you doing that? So, because they kill the yard. I'm like, no, they don't. I said, as a matter of fact, if you'll look where you just kicked, the grass is higher and the grass is greener. The fungi are helping to mitigate nutrients of all the different organisms that are in your yard. And he just looks at me and does this and walks away.
You should tell my daughter that. She likes to step on them.
Do you, if you have potted plants at your house, do you use any sort of fungi and put them in the pot plants? No, not at all.
We did have this spring going into summer, we did have an outbreak of corn smut in our corn that was growing in our garden. Right? And so what do you think I did?
Took pictures.
Huh?
Took pictures.
I did take pictures, but do you think I got mad or do you think I got happy?
You got happy.
I
You
got
probably
real
ate
happy.
it.
Why did I get happy?
They'll grow better.
Huh?
They'll grow better.
Oh, they can, with gibberellic acid, they can. That's a growth hormone produced by fungi. Well, why did I get happy about corn smut?
Chance to say corn smut every day.
Healthy
Oh, it
environment.
is delicious. It is a Hispanic delicacy. The Latinos love it. It's called huitlacoche. You heard it? You've heard it. Have you eaten it?
No,
Okay. You heard it? Eat it?
I've seen it prepared.
Seen it. You're from Lockhart. Seen it, heard it?
I have no idea. I eat everything, so probably.
Is it on
You seen
your
it?
corn?
Yeah, I'll show it to you in a minute. My wife was holding it, she looked at me, she goes, "What is this?" I said, "Oh my God, that's corn smudge." She goes, should we tear down all the plants?" I'm like, "No, that's delicious, we're cooking it up and eating it." And we did. Right? I tried to get my summer class microbiology to eat it, they would not. They were very skittish. But this is what the corn smut looks like. Right? And you cook it up with eggs and a little bit of bean, and then you make taquito, by taco, right? And then this is chicken and horse. Okay? This is delicious also. In the morning, one of the young ladies said their father goes out to look for it. I'm like, oh, I want to go with him. Mostly because I want to know where he's looking, because I can find him. Because it's delish.
How
It
do you
is
eat
delish.
it?
How do you heat it?
How do you eat it?
I
Like,
put
how
a
do you
little bit of
prepare it?
butter, a little bit of, cut it up, put a little egg or little beans or meat, and make a little taco.
Chicken and forest one?
Mmm,
It's
delish.
so good.
It is
I
delish.
blew my mind at the little mushroom festival.
Yeah, so there's a company here in town that's
It
called
really is.
High Mycology or something like that. And they grow all these mushrooms and then they sell them at farmers markets. I've seen them the one on First Street, but somebody else said they saw them in one on Westgate. So they're all over, right? And they are delicious.
High mycology spelled H-I.
I don't know, look it up. So if you have I think it's called look up,
HYE, I think it was.
I'm not sure, but they're really gross.
Do
They
they
had-
both taste like mushrooms?
It tasted like chicken for real to me.
Really?
Oh, yeah. And then they also had it in like a,
Oh, it's hi-fi.
it was
Hi-fi.
rolled in coconut in
Yeah.
a different way.
Different ways you can make it.
It was amazing.
These are truffles. How many people ever had truffles? They are delish. Now, truffles are not the little chocolate candy. That's a marketing ploy. Truffles are really fungus. They're really macroscopic fungi. And they grow underneath the ground. Right, I had a friend who would grow them in Wimberley and then sell them. And the way he would just put the spawn out there, and then he had a big pet hog, and he'd call me over, we're gonna go hunting. I'm like, okay, we weren't going hunting for animals, we were going hunting for the truffles. And he'd get his big old hog and let it go, and the hog would go around, and then he'd smell, and he'd start digging. And when he started digging, we tried to move it out of the way and get the truffles, but sometimes the pig was a little bit more wanting the truffle than we were, and it wouldn't move, and so we just lost that day. But we could find a lot of truffles on this property, and they are delicious.
You use the pig, huh?
Uh-huh. So they use dogs also, but pigs are really good at finding truffles.
Do the truffles just grow naturally there?
Well, they do grow naturally, but he was putting spawn
Where is that?
in Wimberley.
Oh.
Yep.
I'd read somewhere that in the restaurants, when they advertise truffle this and truffle that, they're not actually using truffles, they're getting some sort of oil.
It's
essence.
a truffle oil. So, yeah, because I ran into the same problem in Vegas. My wife and I were in Vegas, and we were by one of the real big restaurants, and they were saying today we're serving truffle soup with some very high-end, they said they called it designer truffles. I'm like, you gotta try this. And my wife said, okay. We went in there, we paid $40 for a little tiny cup of
Oh
soup.
my gosh.
And then I was expecting to have chunks of truffle in it, right? And the person came and delivered the soup, and I said, well, where's the truffle? So the guy's gonna come around and bring you the truffle. So I was thinking chunks of truffle that were cooked. He came over and said, y'all, I'm gonna put a little truffle in your soup. I said, okay. He got a little tiny grater, it was about this big, and he went like this like 3 times, and that was it. And I'm like,
It's very Vegas.
I picked one of
That
them
is
up,
very
I
Vegas.
put it in my mouth, I'm like, I'm gonna savor this truffle, because
Yeah.
that's all I'm gonna get. But you can buy truffles. The last time market value I saw was about $250 a pound for truffles.
I was, well, this was in Oregon, but I was shopping around Thanksgiving, and we were at Costco, and they had a big, like, 2
Black truffles?
big black truffles and a shaver, and like a little thing so you could put oil and make your own oil, and I think it was like $40, but they're so, I mean, I just figured out what truffles were like a year ago, and I was like, this is the best food, but it's
Why are truffles so
expensive.
They're rare, they're hard to harvest, and they're desired.
They haven't figured out a way just to do them in a greenhouse?
Yeah.
yes, they can, but those are, I don't know, those are the ones that people don't want for whatever reason. I would take them.
We're going to Mars before we can get our truffles fixed.
Yeah.
So I still don't know why we wanna go to Mars. That just baffles me completely. So, you know, with the whole space program, I'm gonna get a little off topic. The whole space program just baffles me, except the DART thing, I thought that was a good application. Right? But why do we wanna colonize the moon or Mars? Why don't we try to fix the problems here on Earth?
There's a lot of questions.
Anyway, let's go on. Here is my wife holding the corn smut that was growing in our backyard. And it grew on about half of the corn. So I got a nice yield of corn smut. Now, if you go to Fonda or some of the other nice restaurants, they sell these things, but they call them corn mushrooms. Because if they said corn smut, how many people are gonna eat those?
I'd be curious, because it sounds a little.
But
odd.
most people would just say corn
I don't
smut.
know.
What smut? And then they wouldn't eat it, right? But if you call it corn mushrooms, they're like, oh, mushrooms. Oh, exotic mushrooms, because, you know, that's what other people would eat. So when the big snowstorm happened, I lost all my Arizona ash trees in my yard, 4 of them. And so I cut them down, I had people come over and pick up all the wood, take them away. But I had these big old stumps in the yard. And the company who picked up the wood and took it someplace said, well, we can go ahead and grind down these stumps for you if you want, $300 a stump. I'm like, yeah, no. I said, I have a different way of doing that. So what I did was I went into the woods behind my house, and I found mushrooms that were growing in trees already, and I picked them off of the tree, and then I took them over, and I put the spores on the actual tree, on the stump, and the mushrooms went to work, and all my stumps are completely degraded now. This is the power of understanding how the microbes are important.
How long did it take?
About 2 months.
That was
That's
it.
not long at all.
About 2 months.
Is that what's in the stuff you can buy at Lowe's?
Is there what now?
Is that what's in the stuff you can buy at Lowe's? The stump remover, you know what I'm talking about? It's a powder.
I don't know. I didn't even know they had that.
Yeah, it's some kind of powder. I don't know if it's chemicals, probably. But it's some kind of powder that you buy.
That you like drill
Did it have to
into
be
the
shaded?
hole.
Yeah,
is it
you
direct
drill
sunlight?
into it.
Doesn't make a difference. This is in direct sunlight.
Oh, it's right
That's
here.
pretty impressive, you can do it in the summer?
Yeah, I did it in the summer. Yeah. Tell me what it is. It looks like a chemical. But then, you know, the mushrooms, they start to break down the ligand in the wood and they attract other little things, like nematodes and other insects and things like that, and so they all go down. And now it's so nice, and the soil is so rich in that area because of all the nutrients we put back in. I could plant another tree there and the tree would do really well. Right? My wife won't let me do it because she's thinking about redesigning the front yard, and so my wife, she takes forever to come up with what she wants to do. I'm still trying to fix the house in Bastrop, and I said, we need to do this, and she's like, I have to figure out what the floor is gonna look like first. I'm like, can we just decide on a color of one wall so I can paint it?
Potassium nitrate.
Oh, but yeah, I know. Okay. So let's talk about these organisms for a clinical perspective. I always want to kind of give you nature and then clinical, right? So if we think about the yeast, there are some yeasts that are dangerous to us, but most of them are opportunistically pathogenic. What does that mean, Michelle?
That they'll, if they get the chance to. they'll-
Given the right
Yeah.
set of circumstances, they will cause infection, right? Hence, this is Candida albicans. Candida albicans grows like these. These are yeast cells, but sometimes they aggregate in chains, and we say that they are pseudohyphae. Pseudohyphae mean fake hyphae, yes? And so when they grow in these things, they're really easy to diagnose because Candida albicans and other Candida species are the only ones that will produce these pseudohyphae. If you see pseudohyphae in Buddy, it's a Candida species. Now, Candida albicans and glabrata and a bunch of other ones are famous for causing infections like vaginitis, yeast infections, thrush, things like that, right? And so if we look at them, we need to understand that if we look at them and we see pseudohyphae, we can diagnose them, but most yeasts that are gonna cause us problems, they don't have any morphological differences that differentiate them from each other. They all look like yeast, it's hard to differentiate. So we have to treat them much like we do bacteria. We have to do biochemical testing, much like what we're doing today, or what we have been doing for the last week. And we've been looking at what do they use as a nutrient and what do they produce as an end product of the metabolic pathways, right? And we're gonna continue on doing that today. However, if you look at these images, this is looking inside the vaginal canal. You can see the cervix. This is looking inside of a very young kiddo's mouth, and you can see the yeast growing on the soft palate. This is thrush, and this is vaginitis. Same organism that's causing two different infections, okay? Now, usually when there are infections by these types of organisms, something has to be going wrong with the immune system or with the types of organisms that are in the body. Ladies, you're more apt to get a yeast infection when? Stress is one of them, but taking antibiotics, right? So if we think about this for a minute, you take the antibiotics, it kills off most of the organisms and bacteria, and now there's nothing to keep the yeast in check, and the yeast can come back to all this space that's in the vaginal cavity. And if you had to think of the vagina as a space in the body, it is the perfect temperature, lots of nutrients, and lots of moisture. The yeast go crazy. When I was about 26, I had a problem. I was working at J&J. I was working 80 hours for them. I was teaching 2 classes here, and I was taking 2 classes at Texas State for my second master's degree. I was pretty busy. I was pretty stressed out. And one morning I woke up and the back of my throat hurt, and I told my wife, I said, I might have strep throat. She goes, well, you know what to do. Well, I have my own microscope, so I went back to my room, looked in there, no, it's not strep throat, it's thrush. So I was working in Round Rock. You know where IKEA is? Mm-hmm. That's where my plant was. That's where J&J was. That's hallowed ground. I don't go to IKEA for anything. It's hallowed ground. But I was going to a physician there. His name was Spencer Chen. He loved me because I always diagnosed everything that was wrong with me before I came to see him. So I walk in the door and he goes, oh, what does my favorite microbiologist want to talk about today? And I said, Doc, I have thrush. He goes, no, you don't. I said, yeah, I have thrush. I said, he goes, no, I don't believe it. And I said, here, I brought a slide. I made my own slide, so I had it ready for him to And so he gave it to his lab person. The lab person went out the door, and he looked in there, and he says, oh, I see what you're talking about. And the guy came back and he said, thrush. I said, oh. I said, well, what do you want to do about this? And he started writing down. He goes, what would you like to take? I said, how about 3 days of diflucan? He goes, good choice. And he wrote it down. 'Cause I love diflucan. Number one, it was a J&J drug. Number two, it worked. And he said, now I have to ask you some questions. I said, Doc, I've only been with my wife. I've never paid for sex. I've never had sex with a man. Why was he asking all these questions?
Is thrush a sexually transmitted disease?
Because could it be transferred from a vaginal canal to oral?
Well, it could be, but that's not the reason. Thrush is an indicator of immunosuppression. So therefore, what did he think I had? HIV. He said, well, I think I want to be sure. Would you mind if, because he was very intelligent and he was he thought forward all the time. He goes, I would like to go ahead and test you for HIV. I said, Doc, I just gave blood a month ago and I was negative and nothing significant has happened in my life. I doubt that I'm positive. He said, but you did talk about 3 needle sticks in your past life. What if the virus was dormant and now it's coming? Really? I said, okay, Doc, I tell you what. I was just playing with him at this point. I said, if you give me the HIV test and it's negative, you pay for it. If it's positive, I pay for it. He goes, but then it was a challenge to him. He goes, done. We both knew I had insurance. It was going to pay for it. But it was just a challenge. And of course, I came back negative. But, it was fun. And then I moved away from Round Rock, from working in Round Rock, and came south. And I lost track with him because he's just too far north. But Dr. Spencer Chen, if he's still practicing, is an outstanding physician. Yep.
So is that why new mothers and babies can get it? Cysts
mamas and
and-
babies, so the yeast is on the skin, and the babies, when they suckle on the breast, they leave moisture behind, and the yeast can grow, and then the babies have the only thing they have to protect them are white blood cells. They haven't really developed any of the other,
Because they haven't been exposed.
correct, and so then they can develop thrush.
So it's not really a suppressed immune system in a sense, it's just because they haven't been
That is correct.
exposed.
That is
Okay.
correct. So people always used to say, well, if your baby gets thrush, you're not taking care of your baby. That's not true. It's just a matter of circumstances, right? So you should never, belittle somebody whose baby's got thrush because something's happened. It's truly an imbalance of the organisms, but in the baby's case, it's because they haven't been exposed yet, right? I'm all for babies crawling around, licking things, whatever, right? And so I just think that's the way we develop our immune system. This is Cryptococcus neoformans, so it's highly encapsulated. And so you can see here is the electron micrograph showing the yeast, but the electron micrograph is always showing the network of sugar that's forming the capsule around it, right? So this is important to understand because in a little bit I'm going to talk about dimorphism, and dimorphism is what makes some of these fungi very dangerous to us is they're dimorphic, and when they're outside in nature they're immobile. When they get inside our body they become yeast, and they become yeast, and then they can protect themselves by developing these capsules around themselves. Right? And so those are going to be some of the similarities that we're going to see about the 4 different pathogens that we're going to talk about in just a little bit. Okay?
Can you tell me what that was called again?
Which one?
The bone right?
This is called Cryptococcus neoformans.
Okay.
So this one usually infects people nosocomially. That's why it's here. But no, nosocomially is not hospital.
Oh.
So this is the nares, okay? But there was a case. Somebody can look it up who's got a computer open. There was a case in Oregon, where people, I think it was Oregon, but there were people hiking and camping who were coming down with this infection of a really strange species of Cryptococcus, and the name of that organism was Cryptococcus aureus, A-R-I-S.
It was on a really popular trail.
Yeah, and so we don't know why all of a sudden that species of Cryptococcus has started infecting people, because these individuals appear to have nothing in common. Why was it causing infection?
They're taking the same trail though, stopping at the same watering holes, at the same sites.
We don't know exactly. I mean, epidemiologists were all over it, but I don't know what they found out because I kind of lost track.
I remember I read one thing that said it was a possibility that like some kind of dog brought it in, like a mangy dog, and somehow it like mutated on the dog or something. I don't know. It could have been so far out there.
I just didn't hear anything after that, so I lost track.
I remember it was kind of a big thing for a minute.
The year
What's
this
that?
happened?
What year? I don't know. I don't remember. 6 years back, maybe?
Cryptococcus and hikers.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago.
Cryptococcus aureus, I believe is the name. Let's go on. So with the moles, right, it is really about the mycelia, but also about the asexual spores. The asexual spores are like a fingerprint. We can tell what organism they are by what their spores look like, right? So this one right here, these are spores of a group of organisms that are called Alternaria. Alternaria is the most common of all the allergens that we find in the airways here. It makes you sneeze all the time, right? Especially if you're sensitive to it. And so if we think about the structures of the moles and the macroscopic organisms, they are mycelia, the 2 different types of mycelia. One segment in the septate mycelia is known as a hypha, plural hyphae. Sometimes you hear people call them hyphoelements. Same thing, right? It just means that they're the vegetative structures of the mold. So if we think about mold, they're multicellular, they're spore-bearing, they're achlorophyllous. What does that mean, Sarah? They're achlorophyllous. No chlorophyll. So if they have no chlorophyll, they're not photosynthetic. right? And they can reproduce sexually or asexually, and whose usually filamentous somatic structures can be septate or aseptate. And then their nutritional requirements are aided or facilitated by the production of two major enzymes. And those two major enzymes are cellulase, break down plants, or chitinase, break down the exoskeleton of arthropods. Okay? So that means if they infect us, they have to produce other different types of enzymes.
What's an arthropod again?
Anything with an exoskeleton, insects, crayfish, lobsters, you could go on and on and on. Okay? So here you can see the mycelia. The mycelia produce these asexual spores. The asexual spores get distributed. However they get distributed, they land someplace, Isabella sandwich, and then it just simply germinates and it forms an exact copy of the organism that produced it. Right? Yep.
Do the spores work in the same way as seeds? So it lands in my sandwich, I eat it, and then when I pass
No,
it,
so the spores do not have to, in some cases, seeds, for some plants, have to be, the cuticle has to be broken down by the acids of somebody's intestinal tract, some bird or some, it doesn't work like that here. The spores don't even need to go through the intestinal tract at all.
But if they would that
They may not
affect
make it through there, it's just
Okay.
it's just too hostile.
Okay.
Yes, Eric?
That entire stalk thing on the far right is a hypha?
That is correct.
The entire thing?
The entire thing is mycelia.
So on the little fairy ring or whatnot, that would be the portion coming out of the ground?
No,
No,
that is
that's
the
right.
portion that's in the ground.
Gotcha.
Portion coming out of the ground is the reproductive structure,
Okay.
okay? So asexual spores, I add a little column down here. For the lower fungi, they're always inside a vesicle. This is a vesicle, here the spores inside. When that vesicle breaks apart, all the spores get released. The higher ones, the more evolved, the more complex ones, they're on the outside of the vesicle like this, right? And so all they need is just some little force to make them go into the air. And that little force can be you walking around and tromping around in the woods. It can be a little breeze, they all get blown up. And so it's pretty interesting to think about how easily these things get disseminated. Okay? So there's different ways you can see that the spores are inside a vesicle, and then you can see there's lots of different ways that the artist here is representing how they can be outside a vesicle. Okay? So yeast bud produce pseudohyphae in some cases. Mycelia are produced by molds and by macroscopic organisms. But the macroscopic organisms also have clamp connections, and I don't know if you can see them, but the clamp connections are right here. And the clamp connections are kind of like gap junctions. What's a gap junction? So it's the way that two cells that are near each other can communicate with each other through cell signal. So all of the big organisms, all the mushrooms, the toadstools, the puffballs, all those things have clamp connections. Okay? So that's what these little things are representing. If I was to draw that, if I was to draw two cells that have clamp connections, I would draw the two cells that look like this, and then I would draw the clamp connection to look like this. And that's the way that those two cells would communicate with each other. Okay? So there could be ligands, there could be signal molecules that get released, right? How many people have AMP2 already? So if you should be blowing my class away, right? Because
So different though.
yeah, you're right.
This is pulling stuff way back from like a basic
Third
biology
grade.
class, and then like some stuff I learned in 7th grade about bacteria and mushrooms. And I'm just like, oh.
I'm surprised they taught you at 7th grade, because I didn't hear anything about bacteria until I was in high school.
Miss McCoy,
Oh,
she
okay.
was the bomb. That was her jam. She was like you in lady form in 5th grade.
Okay, so I want to talk about the different groups of fungi, of molds that have clinical relevance. And then we'll talk a little bit about the Basidium mycota, the big guys. They don't have a lot of clinical relevance, but they sure as hell can make you sick. Yes,
I would like to know what you said in regards to the clamp connections. I just wanna make sure I have it right. So sun connections are like gap junctions.
Between cells of the Basidiomycota, of the mushrooms, the toadstools, and puffballs, those guys.
Mushrooms, toadstools.
All those things you all
puffballs.
talked about at that little meeting that you all had, those guys, okay? Not gonna be found on your everyday mold, just on mushrooms. If you want, if somebody wanted to, I might think I could do, maybe I'll bring a mushroom in and I'll dissect
I
it
have a
very
lot of
thinly.
mushrooms in my.
And we'll see if we can find plant connections.
Is it allowing some sort of conduction of something between the cells?
The ligand, a ligand,
Okay. Or
a
just
signal
one?
molecule,
Okay.
okay? So I do wanna mention that the ascomycota are gonna be the most important group, right? And the ascomycota are anamorphic and telomorphic. What that means is, anamorphic means they only reproduce asexually. Telomorphic means they have the ability to reproduce sexually. Okay? Good? Anamorphic means what, Eric?
Asexually?
Right. Telomorphic means what, Jess?
Sexual.
Sexual. We'll go on. Alright, so, if we think about these for a minute, the zygomycota are a group, so the next three organisms, or group of organisms we're gonna talk about, are all gonna be less evolved. They're all gonna have aseptate mycelia, right? But they're interesting because they're affecting us, right? The zygomycota are called the zygomycota because at some point in their life cycle, Miss Valencia, they produce a zygote, right? So here you have two different mycelia coming together, and there's exchange of sexual information, so it's a zygote. Yes? This is a sexual state right here, okay? But these guys are gonna infect us where there's large amounts of oxygen. Where would those places be, Christian? Name one place where there's a lot of oxygen on a body. Huh? What does that mean?
Your head.
Your head.
Skin.
Oh, skin is one.
Respiratory.
Respiratory is the other. One more. Mucous membranes. Okay? So those three parts of the body are going to be infected by mold. Why, Tay?
Breathe it in.
No, they're going to tell you. Because they are.
Because they are aerobic. Okay.
Okay? Good? All right, here we go. So, the zygomycota can infect skin, lungs, and they can infect the mucous membranes. The chytrids are important not because they infect us, but because they're destroying the natural habitat of lots of amphibia. So before the chytrids, we always talked about them, Tram, as being the big recyclers of nutrients in the aquatic habitats. But over the last 8 years or so, we've started to see the chytrids destroy frogs and salamanders and all kinds of things, right? And we think that's because the changing of the environment and how that's occurring. So they produce this reddening of the skin of the frogs, which then causes them to start to bleed. They lose a lot of blood and they die. Okay? And it's taking them out a lot. We're losing a lot of frogs.
What do you mean it's because of the change of the environment, like how so?
We're getting warmer.
Okay.
Yeah. Costello.
Hopefully it's something we can do about it.
We can't. It's too late, I think. We just, we are causing our own demise. Won't happen in my life.
Let's overpopulate Austin with frogs and amphibians. Just balance it out a little bit. We'll each grow like 100 tadpoles.
True, let's do that.
But the problem is, in order for frogs to survive, they need
Not
what?
enough food.
They need what?
Water.
Frogs need what?
Water.
Water. Where are you gonna find water around
Your
here?
pond.
My creek in the back of my house has been dry for 6 months. It's a wet weather creek.
Ladybird Lake. Just throw
And
one
then
more thing
people
in
would
it.
say, I'm not going paddle boarding, there's too many frogs.
They would. They've said it before, they're still out there.
I don't think you can even get in that water though. I don't think it's got like.
You
straight
can.
runoff.
No, you can. You just don't wanna drink it.
People don't swim in it particularly. They might
Oh.
fall off their paddleboard and like get back on their raft.
Is that the one where those dogs were dying?
Yes.
Okay,
Um,
okay, but not in the entire lake, only
certain
around a
part.
certain part.
Yeah, standstill
That's
water.
Bottle Island.
Yeah.
I stay away from all
Only
of
real
it.
place.
Because I'm terrified that my dog's gonna die.
Well, don't take it there then.
Oh, I have not taken it.
It didn't used to be bad though, like when I first moved here, our friend used to take his dog to Red Bud every day.
If we start to get a significant amount of rain, it won't be a problem. The only reason it's a problem is because we're having less water exchange, and the water around there is becoming more stagnant. And so the cyanobacteria, the blue-green algae are
Yeah.
going crazy, and they're the ones that release the toxins.
Also, just the plain waste, I live in LA, in the town, like, right, and so the waste even have to run all the garbage that we produce.
That's what
is-
Samantha was saying.
It's disgusting.
People are very nasty.
Well, not only that, but people take their dog and then they don't take the poo, they don't clean the poo up, and all that stuff ends up in the water.
Or people are drinking beer in the lake and are just all standing in each other's pee.
Yeah.
And I'm not so much worried about pee, right?
Yeah.
Because that gets broken down pretty quickly.
Yeah.
If I'm in a lake and I feel a warm sensation come over, I'll look at the person next to me and I go, really? Tram, really, Tram?
I don't go to
But I'm not
lakes.
gonna be mad at Tram, I'm just gonna be, really, Tram? Come on.
Dollar will say, Mom,
But if I
I'm peeing on
see,
you."
if I see a little floaty, I mean, oh my God. So the trichomycota are parasites of insects. I have one of these in my refrigerator right now that destroys fire ants. And so when I have a little time, I'm gonna do a little research on it, I'm gonna give it a name, and I'm gonna give it to the world. I'm not gonna charge for anything. One of my students this morning said, Pro V, did you know you have 736 followers on YouTube? I'm like, no, I didn't know that. I'm an influencer. But I don't monetize anything, right? So if this fungus is in nature, I just happen to find it serendipity. I shouldn't profit from that find. I should just give it away so we can get rid of fire ants.
I try to make every big researcher that way.
It's not gonna happen.
Don't worry about
So
money.
you're keeping it in the fridge to inhibit growth?
Slow it down.
To slow, yes.
Look at you.
But wouldn't you try to push it the other way and incubate it so?
That way you can.
Only when I'm working with it. When I'm not working, I don't wanna get it, I
So
don't
you don't
wanna
want it
get
to
out
be
of control.
overgrown and, okay.
I like
How
to-
do you know that it's against, good against like fire ants?
Because one of my ex-students called me and said, something's going on with the ants around my property. And I said, okay, I'll come out and look. And I said, why do you care if the fire ants are dying? He goes, oh, I didn't know there were fire ants. I'm like, yeah, your fire ants are all dying. And so we took a little bit of sample and I put it in the petri dish and I grew it. And then just to test it, I used Cook's postulate. I went out to the backyard and I put it on a mound of fire ants and we killed them all.
What does it look like?
It's a little bit fuzzy, it produces a red pigment, it's pretty cute.
I just wonder if that's what's at our house because we usually, we'll leave them out in the pasture and stuff because they're good for some things. We've been trying to kill them recently, because it killed all our jackrabbits.
Yeah, and so fire ants are bad all the way around because they kill all other species.
Mhm.
You don't get ticks, but I'd rather have a tick than a fire ant.
I don't know.
I did have one friend call me and say, can you come and help me? My next door neighbor thinks that there's a miracle going on in her backyard. I'm like, what are you talking about? So I went over there and her cactus had all this red oozy stuff coming out of it, and she said that the cactus was bleeding. And that she had prayed and that the cactus was bleeding because something remarkable had happened, and now I'm like, oh. First of all, I thought it was cochineal at first. Everybody know what that means? The little bitty scale insects that produce wet pigment. I thought it was cochineal. But I took it, it wasn't. It was a bacterial disease for the cactus.
And it would have the red pigment.
It was producing a red pigment.
I've just noticed lately
That
we
was,
have
that
no
was
fire.
diffusible. It wasn't part of the colony,
Wow.
but it was diffusible. That's why all of the exudate that was coming out of the cactus looked like blood. I have that one in my refrigerator also.
What are you gonna do with that?
I don't know.
Does it kill
I'm gonna figure out what it is and then
Does it kill the cactus though?
kill the
Can you release it on my property?
cactus.
Precious, what is all in your fridge?
I would just say, like, do you have two
What else do you have
fridges,
in
like?
there?
Well, I do have 2 fridges. My wife will not let me keep anything
I don't
microbiological
believe
or
it.
warning for you.
I don't
She goes, this
believe
is for food, this is little areas for you.
Yeah.
So I keep, you know, my tea and my Gatorade and my water and my fungi, all, and my bacteria are all right there.
I don't know how you get rid of cactus. I've seen people in like West Texas who burn them.
I don't know why you
Why
would
do you-
wanna get rid of cactus.
We have animals and the cows, and we have like 2 or 3 acres that's been overtaken by cactus, and we don't wanna release the cows.
But
because we
it
had a
won't
cow
hurt them,
pit.
will it?
The jumping cactus, and it hurts, like the calves mess around, we call it jumping cactus, I don't know. So it gets all over you, and we had a calf die because
Oh, because
it got
of the.
too many and got infected.
okay.
So we don't.
I thought eating them.
No, we don't mess with them. But my dog too, my dog is a dumbass and goes over there and gets covered in them, and I have to spend 3 hours on the porch with my tweezers, and he's like soaking it up, you know, but it's just annoying.
I get it. Okay, let's talk about the Basidiomycota. So the Basidiomycota are the big organisms. Most of these are not dangerous to us because they're not gonna cause infections. However, certain of them will produce silicons and will produce other molecules that can make us intoxicated, if you want, right? But these are beautiful organisms. Look, this is just a very small sampling of them. But look at all the colors and all the beauty. In my property at Bastrop, I've counted over 80 different species of the Basidiomycota on there. 3 of them are edible, right? So I took the chanterelles and I spread the spores out. Hope I get a whole bunch of chanterelles. I just need rain, and we haven't had any rain in a long time. This is the time that they start to grow. If I get a good rainstorm, chanterelle I will be eating. Are you with me? Yep.
We have some different types of like weird looking stuff, like kind of similar to that. I don't even remember what it looks like now. On a certain piece of our property by a tank, like growing on the trees. It's heavily wooded.
Those are called fungies. Not edible.
I don't want to eat any
Okay.
of it. I'm scared. I have a book that like I read over edible things, but I would be the one that's unlucky and would be like, oh, that kind of looks like it, and then I would.
The puffballs are edible if you catch them early.
We've had
In
those
Oregon,
all the time.
are the puffballs big?
I don't know, I haven't seen them. Like, people do like mushroom hunting, like my brother-in-law, his sister, they have like a mushroom dog, and they like sell mushrooms.
yeah.
and
We were in North Carolina, and we were driving down, going to the Smokies and gonna go to Cherokee. And I noticed, I said, stop the car, and my wife stopped the car, I went out there, and there was this huge puff. And the guy came out and said, what are you doing? I said, I'm really looking at this puffball. And he said, you mean that fungus? I said, yeah. He said, I said, is this your property? He goes, yeah. He said, I said, do you want that puffball? He said, oh no, there's a bunch of them on my property. I don't want it. I said, can I have it? He said, yes. So I had this big old puffball that was like, this
Somebody
size
still talks about it.
about
that encounter.
about the basket. It was about the size of a basketball. And my wife said, you did not take that puffball from that man's property. I said, he gave it to me. She said, okay. So we got to the place where we were gonna stay, and she said, well, you wanna have a cookout, and maybe I'll go get some steak, and you can cook up the puffball. I'm like, we don't need steak. I said, we have the puffball. That thing is good, and it'll fill you up. So I cut the puffball, this big old, I made like 4 beautiful steaks out of it, and had puffball.
They're so
It was
good.
delicious. You can only eat the puffball when they are immature. Once they start to spoil it, you can't eat them anymore.
Next time you do it, melt
Salt,
some
pepper.
brie.
They become toxic. Huh?
Olive oil, salt, pepper, what do you do?
I just browned it, and then we put some kind of, we didn't have a lot, cause we were, on vacation. So she mixed up some kind of something or other, we put it on top. It was delish. It was good.
They're really tasty.
Yeah.
We
She
know
said, we
that-
can make a hamburger out of this. I'm like, what? No, just eat it. Yeah.
What did you say it produces that's toxic to us?
Once it starts to sporulate.
But you said a word.
Syllabins.
Syllabus, is it air or?
No, you want me to write it?
Yeah.
And you can notice it when, if you ever found one that's way too overgrown, it's like a cloud. It's like dust, it looks like dust that comes off it if you break it
Isn't
open.
that what the magic mushrooms, so when Puffball is sporulating, it becomes a magic mushroom?
So the shrooms themselves, usually, people can take them and cook them up when they are growing, but almost everybody dries them first.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah. In Corpus Christi, Texas, when I was growing up, there were only two things to do that was fun for us. One was go to the beach and surf, and two was go to the cow patties, pick the shrooms, cook up the shrooms, drink the soup, and then you didn't need waves. You could air surf all night long. Tram, what do you think? The wave is great. Look at this.
You wouldn't even have to leave your house. Is that what makes them taste so bad?
What?
That toxic?
No, I don't know. I mean, I am one of the people that will never do anything that I potentially could get syllabus. I'm just not gonna do that. I don't feel like making a fool out of myself. Or dying, or worse, dying. So I'm just not gonna
tried it
do
one
it.
time.
Okay? Let's go on and talk about the ascomycota. So lab is very short today. I'm gonna finish this lecture because it's very short. But the ascomycota are the most important part. This is a sexual state. This is called an ascocarp. Those in there are all sexual spores. They're each unique. Right? And remember, the fungi, the molds will reproduce sexually when, Sarah? When they're stressed. And Jin, when are they stressed?
I'm sorry,
No nutrients, right? This is a piece of wicker furniture. My wife and I, we love to go treasure hunting, right? For my birthday, we went to Smithville to find treasure. We didn't find anything. But she found some depression glass, and now is probably gonna go back and buy it because she found out that they're worth a lot of money. And so she's probably gonna go back and buy it. This weekend, if you all need something to do, there is going to be, at the Guerrero Park right over here, there's gonna be the mycology group is gonna meet over there and talk about how mushrooms remediate soils and what's good soil and things like that. But my neighborhood is having their annual garage sale, so Granada Hills and Oak Hill, if you wanna go treasure hunting, you'll probably see me there. I'll probably be there.
With bags and
Yeah,
stuff.
so last time I rode my bike to do treasure hunting, I had so much stuff, I had to go get the truck, because I had so much stuff. But so if you're interested, you do that. But this is wicker furniture. This is a picture of a little piece of wicker furniture that I was in an estate sale, and I was looking at it real closely, and the lady came up and said, "Oh, are you interested in my wicker furniture?" I said, "I am." And my wife looked at me and said, and she knew where I was going. And the lady said, "Would you like to buy it?" I said, "No, but I'm really interested in the sexual state of the fungi that's growing in it." And she looked at me like, and she goes, "That's dust." I'm like, "No, ma'am, it's not dust. This is the sexual state of what a little organism we call Soteria fimacola." And she looked at me like, "I would like you to leave my property." I'm like, "Oh, I got kicked out of another estate, so." But anyway, today when you go home, I want you, as you're walking across the grass somewhere, I want you to pick up a twig, any twig, and I want you to look at it very carefully. The little black dots that are embedded in the twig are all the sexual state of the fungi. I love Halloween, Tramp. Do you remember that movie, The Sixth Sense? I see dead people. Remember that? I see fungi. Because they're everywhere. Are you looking? Yes.
So
Is it any time that you see the little black spores, that's their sexual state?
The true asexual spores are too tiny, you'll never see them. But these are really vesicles that are holding the spores. They're called ascocarps, and you'll see them. Okay? All right, so I want to talk about the 4 true pathogens. Write this down. These organisms I'm about to talk about are pathogenic because they're dimorphic. Ooh, here's a beautiful word, dimorphic. What does that mean? What does that mean, dimorphic? 2 forms. At room temperature or in nature, they're mold. When they get inside of the body, they become yeast. And when they become yeast, they can take in nutrients quicker, they can grow faster, and they can encapsulate to fend off the immune system. So again, Jen, tell me, where are these moles going to grow?
In moist, wet areas.
On the body.
On body, skin, respiratory.
And because why?
Because
There's a lot of oxygen. Okay? So let's talk about this one first, Darling's disease, the etiology. When I talk about etiology, that's another really cool word, etiology. Because Jessica likes my words. She says I have really great words. Etiology is the study of causation. So when I say the etiology is, that's the cause. Okay? So for Darling's disease, the etiology is Histoplasma capsulatum. Histoplasma capsulatum is usually found associated with the poo of birds and bats, right? So wherever birds and bats are found, you're going to find this particular organism. There's a sickness called spelunker's disease. Anybody know what a spelunker is?
Cave.
People who like to go caving.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when you go caving, you come in contact with guano, right? And bat dropping, poo. And so on them is going to be growing this fungus, and if you breathe it in, you can get sick. Yep.
How does it look on it?
It's a
Can you see
white,
it?
it's a white fuzzy, very loosely
So
fuzzy,
you'd be able to notice it pretty easily.
if you're looking for it. But if you're not looking for it, you'll never see it.
We have bats in our house.
You have bats in your house?
I have bats in my house.
So I wouldn't worry about that.
Cat
They
is
would,
hopefully, they were just bats, I got rid of them,
yeah.
but.
So if you had them one time, I wouldn't worry
No,
about it.
multiple times.
I wouldn't
Yeah,
worry
the
about it.
spelunkers are
Like our,
literally crawling
the
through our
siding
bellies.
in our house is full of bats.
Yeah. Well, so probably somebody ought to go up there and clean it up. Take bleach first, put it on, then pick it up. Okay?
The poultry farms, turkey farms, chicken farms, do they have problems with that?
Yes, but almost nobody, they turn them around so quickly, and they use all of the poo as fertilizer, so you almost never see it. My brother and I, when we were growing up, we would go visit my grandmother, and my grandmother believed that if there were little kids, the little kids should work. And so we didn't like to go over there too much, Tram, because we knew we were gonna get put to work. And every time we went over there, we had to do something. And usually it was like, can you clean out the chicken coop? Now, she asked you nicely, can you clean out the, but she didn't mean that, she meant you need to clean out the chicken coop. So we would go over there, and you never put 2 little boys to clean out a chicken coop, why? Because they start flicking poo at each other, right? But I tested positive for histoplasma. That means I had the organism in my body, I had the antibodies toward it, but I never remember being sick of it, from it. But I was I got into everything, and so I had a pretty good immune system. I still tell my wife, my immune system is on the job, right? So because, when I got COVID, I didn't even know I had it. She goes, you tested positive? I didn't even know I had it, I said, my immune system's on my job. And then she said, you stay here, do not come over to the side of the house, it'll be my side. And I said, what about the kitties? She said, the kitties won't come over here either, you know that. So. But here, if you ever take a picture of your lungs, and if your lungs are healthy and there's no infiltration in your lungs, they're gonna always be dark on a radiograph. Here you can see infiltration. There's something going on. Okay? The next organism, well, here is, chickens and things like that. This is where it's found. It's found in Austin, right? But the next organism is Sporothrix shanki, So you could see they've got really great names, Sporothrix schenki. This one is found with decaying detritus or decaying vegetation, and it's also associated with the thorny plants in nature, roses, pyracantha, anything like that. Well, I don't know about I've never heard about cactus, but for the true thorny ones, right? So if you get stuck by that, like this person did, you can see how they got debrided and they removed all the infectious tissue from it. This is the way it looks. It forms this little kind of floret when it's growing, right? Because every single asexual spore of these organisms are different, and so you can tell them apart from each other. They're like fingerprints. The bad boy of the group is Coccidioides immitis. This is the one where if you've ever watched the commercials for Humira or for things like Imbro, it'll tell you things like, tell your physician if you've ever been in places in the United States where certain soil-dwelling pathogenic fungi are known to exist. Because if you look at their distribution range, it's through Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, into parts of Southern California. And so a lot of times in some of these places, if you're driving, there are these huge signs that basically say, please keep your windows rolled up due to the presence of pathogenic fungi in the soil.
Where's that at?
Arizona. Okay, good. So you can see it's infecting the skin, right? Pretty bad. And then the last one is Blastomyces dermatitidis. Blastomyces dermatitidis is found around bodies of water. It has been found around Town Lake. It has been found around Lake Travis. That does not mean you shouldn't go down there, right? It would be very rare that you pick it up. And if you do pick it up, if you have a good immune system, you might get a little bit sick, but you're not. It's only the immunocompromised that we worry the most about these things. Okay? Now these organisms, if you look at them here, so if I looked at this on the neck, I would think, oh my God, it's a staph infection. And I'd go in there and debride, and then I'd see dimorphic yeast, and I would grow it up, and it would grow like a mycelia on a plate, and so then I'd know. But again, if you take the radiograph, you can see that this is, you can see a little bit of infiltration, but if you look at the lateral view, you can really see the diffused infiltrate in the lungs. So that's why a lot of times when they take radiographs, they take not only the ventral but the lateral view also, so they get a really nice image of what's going on. Okay? These organisms are dimorphic, and because they're dimorphic, they can take in nutrients quicker because their yeast, their generation period is 45 minutes instead of a mold that takes 3 to 5 days. And because they're yeast, they can encapsulate and they can protect themselves from the immune system. Okay? So let's talk about some of the opportunistic pathogens, and the one that we're going to talk about is ringworm, and then we'll talk about sick building syndrome, and then we'll call it a day. But the dermatophytes, right? Dermatophyte, skin loving, that's what that means. The dermatophytes are a group of moles that cause ringworm, right? Ringworm is not caused by a worm, it's caused by a fungus. And so this is what they can look like, right? They can present very differently. Now, this is hyperkeratosis. It's not really an infection by a mold, but this is right here. Right? This is a dermatophyte. That's just hyperkeratosis. As we get older and we lose some of the ability to retain some nutrients, some of us, especially kind of Northern European, will start to develop these type of hyperkeratosis, Hispanics too. Right? And so this is what it looks like when you truly have a fungal infection of the toes. The nails become so brittle that just by touching, they break apart. Okay? Huh?
So that's gotta be the grossest thing.
It is pretty gross. And so back in the day before pandemic, the workout facility used to be open and I'd go down there and I'd work out a little bit. And one time I was in there after I'd finished and I was gonna take a shower, and there was this dude in there that was acting really strange. So the guy was naked when I went in there, and I'm like, okay. And then he got up on the bench, and he was putting his socks on naked on the bench. I'm like, dude, are you okay? He said, I just don't want to pick up athlete's feet, so I wanna put my socks on the bench before I put the rest of my clothes on. I'm like, I said, it's too late, you already have athlete's feet. I said, you see the way your nails are brittle?
Poor
I said
guy.
that's an indication that you have deep-seated mycosis of your toenails.
He's like, I'm never going to the gym again.
But then another guy came in and he saw me talking to this naked guy with his socks, and he looked at me and I looked at him and he walked out again. So he just left. So I guess it did look pretty weird. But I was just schooling this guy about, anyway. So you have to be careful. There are 3 different genera, Trichophyton, Epidermophyton, and Microsporum, that cause ringworm. But the problem is the medical institution does not want to talk about Trichophyton, Epidermophyton, or Microsporum. So they decided we're going to come up with a new term that's going to mean ringworm. And so they came up with tinea. If they say you have tinea, that means you have ringworm. And then the dermatologist said, it doesn't sound scientific enough. We need to give tinea a species name. So guess what they decided, Kristen, to make a species name? The place of the body it infects. Yes? So then it became tinea capitis, okay? Tinea pubis around the pubic area, jock rot. And then the tinea pedis, athlete's feet, tinea corpus, the body, corpus means body. Tinea ungum in the nails, tinea manum of the hand, but it goes, there's a lot more.
Just depends on where it's at.
Just depending on where it's at, right? So it's just really interesting how they didn't want to say Trichophyton, Epidermophyton, or Microsporum, tinea, and then, it doesn't sound scientific enough. Let's give it a species. Oh, how can we do that, Tram? Tram says, well, let's just put the species for Latin for where it is. Okay, fine, we'll do that.
I think it would have been easier just to stick with the 3 names.
Oh, I agree. But if you tell somebody, well, we've done some mycological studies, and you have an infection of Trichophyton, you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna die. But then if you say, you have an infection of tinea, that's so soft. Tinea, don't worry, that's just ringworm. It's not gonna be a problem. We're gonna take care of you.
So athlete's foot is a form of ringworm.
Correct.
Oh.
Good. Questions?
What's
Alright.
the best,
My sisters have that.
way to treat that? Like,
So
do
over
you
the
use
counter-
same treatment with all the things?
Yeah. The treatments are over the counter nowadays. They're miconazole, ketoconazole, itraconazole. They all work. They're great, and they're probably $8 a tube, and they'll last you forever. Yep.
My sisters have this disease.
Malassezia furfur.
Yes.
So-
And I got it at one point too, and I went to a tanning bed, and I just used like Head and Shoulders or something.
Selsun Blue works also.
Selsun Blue, maybe that's what it was.
I am not a physician. I'm not giving you medical advice, but fungi like what kind of conditions?
Hot. No.
Acidic. So if you turn their world upside down by putting something really basic on them,
Oh, yeah.
it'll kill them. Sunspots are caused by a fungus called Malassezia furfur. Right? It's known as Tinea versicolor. It's called versicolor because it models your skin. Now this is a superficial infection. It's not in the dermal layers, it's only in the epidermal layer. And it's not really doing anything other than making you look a little bit mottled. And if you're going out on the town in a evening gown, that might be a problem. Or you're going and you have a really nice swimsuit or whatever, and you want people to check you out, that might be a problem. But other than that, it's not a problem. And it usually happens in our darker skinned individuals, right? So Jess, you might get it, but Tram, you won't, right? It'd be interesting to know that you had it, but you got
My
tan.
sister's redhead
But you got a
too.
tan, but you got a tan, right?
Yeah, my
okay.
sister's redhead and she got it. And my other sister is really dark complexion.
Mhm.
Is it contagious?
Is this person treated with the lotions, the antifungal lotions, or their skin revert back to a uniform?
Yep.
Maybe. My son had it on his face and they told me to use that Selsun Blue but just for a week because it's really strong.
It's
But
really,
he
you don't
said-
wanna get it in your eye either.
Yeah, I had to
right?
be really careful. And he said also, like if he goes outside, it's gonna get worse.
So, yeah, because how alkaline it is, it will remove some of the layers of the skin, and so then the skin becomes very sensitized. Yes, did you have a question?
Yeah, so, yeah, we both like agree that sometimes whenever we get sun, that kind of happens. Is that kind of the same thing?
It is kind of the same.
So, that there's no pigmentation issue in the skin, it is definitely a fungus.
So it's just living with me?
What happens if we leave that untreated?
Nothing.
It just will
It's
be there every
superficial.
summer, basically.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting that you say that. Most of the time it shows up summer or fall.
Yeah, cause I've had it whenever I'm tanning and then it's just.
Why would you tan? Don't tan anymore.
Yeah.
Listen, do not tan
Okay, well,
anymore.
if I'm sitting outside.
Okay, do not tan anymore. That's not good for you. Embrace your color, whatever that might be.
How do you feel about spray tans?
About what?
Spray tans?
I don't have an opinion on
Better than tanning.
it. Just embrace your color.
I do notice that like, if I get, I'm outside for 5 minutes and it's done.
Yeah, you're real fierce. You're like my
Uh,
wife. My wife goes out there for 2 minutes and she's red.
Yeah, so
I have to
it's no
run out there
matter
and give her
what.
her hat.
But like, I have these spots, I wish I had shorts on, I would show you these, like, but they're tiny little white spots, like the prick of a pin. Like on my thighs,
Are they
and
like
they get worse, yeah. Like that. Would that be that?
What is it, just like reverse?
That's just us. That's just
So
us.
this is characterized as like a
Different.
big piece, like a.
Can be a big piece.
Okay.
Okay? All right, sick building syndrome is real. However, less than 0.5% of the entire population are allergic to the mycotoxins. Okay? So this happened after one of the big hurricanes that went through Florida. I don't remember the name. It wasn't the one that went there just recently. This has been here for a while. But you can see where the water line was, right? And so the people who owned this house went in there and they took all the water out, but everything was still moist, and did the worst thing possible. They closed the entire house up. It became an incubator, and then the mold went crazy.
We
Okay?
don't think about it.
Yeah, but this house, would probably have been destroyed a long time ago. Nowadays, we know more about what happens with it. If somebody would sell me this house, I would just take all the sheetrock out and start all over again, and the house would be just fine. Okay?
So nowadays, that's why they tend to demolish before rebuilding.
I don't know if they do that anymore, Tay, because if you own a house, look at the last page of your insurance. It has a rider, it says 2 things. Number 1, we do not cover for any damage associated with mold.
Oh, mold.
Number 2, we do not cover any damage associated with windstorm. So they've taken away the 2 big things that were causing them to lose a lot of money, mold and hurricanes. So if you wanna have insurance against mold or hurricanes, you have to buy a separate policy.
I know a lot of them don't cover floods anymore.
Now, that's also happening where you have to buy flood insurance separate.
Somehow after us owning the property.
After Harvey, that started to happen.
Really? When was that?
No, I don't remember what, it was just, it wasn't too
2012.
far along ago.
I don't know when Harvey was, but I know that we were switching the mortgage in our house, and the new,
Well, the floodplains have all changed also, yeah.
my
So
house, my property has never flooded in the 200 years that our family has owned it, but yet we're in the worst flood zone there is.
Well, my property now that I own in Oak
It's
Hill,
in a flood zone.
half of it is in the flood zone, including where my workshop is. Oh, we're not gonna cover your workshop anymore, it's in the floodplain. I'm like,
Our house is in a flood zone, and literally if we moved it 200 yards,
it wouldn't be.
it wouldn't be in a flood zone, and it's in the worst flood zone you can imagine.
The 2 organisms that are typically associated with sick building syndrome are Stachybotrys and Cladosporium. They produce mycotoxins, but remember, only 0.5% of the population is allergic to mycotoxins. To most people, it's not gonna affect. So I had a friend of mine call me years ago. I grew up with him, we went to high school together. He said, I know you know a lot about this stuff. There's a house that the bank will sell me. It's been foreclosed on. The bank will sell it to me for $100,000. I said, what street is it on? He said, Louisiana. I said, you should buy it. He goes, but it's got mold in it. I'm like, how much mold does it have? He goes, the bank says it has a lot. So I said, my mom was still alive. I said, well, I'm gonna go down there this weekend. Let's you and I go and look at it. So we did. It was a space this big that they had a big old air conditioning unit in the wall. It was an older house, you know, they didn't have central air. So they cut out a piece of wall, they stuck the air conditioning unit leaked, and there was mold all down here. And so we went in the house and I said, well, where's the mold? He said, it's right there. I said, is that it? He said, yeah. I said, buy the house. I said, buy the house right now.
Is that what's considered black mold?
Nothing in the attic, nothing in
I said, buy the house right now. If you don't wanna buy it, I will buy it. He said, okay. We bought it. He and I cleaned it up. We took the AC out. He put in central air. That's the big thing that he put in. But now he's got this house that's been paid off that he's been living in. And it's beautiful. And it's on Louisiana Street. For those of you who don't know, Corpus Christi, Louisiana Street is old money,
Ooh,
big
I know
town
where that
house.
is.
Right by Spawn Hospital. Beautiful. And I said, man, if you ever die, you need to leave me that house. They'll leave it to the side. Right? Now, I practice what I preach. You know that, right? So when we were looking for property in Bastrop, we came across this house that was completely not taken care of. And we walked in, and we looked around, and this is what we saw. Right? So we saw all this mold growing everywhere. And my friend is my real estate agent. I play tennis with him every Wednesday night. And he said, man, he goes, you know, I really care for you and Bev. I want to tell you right now, I don't want you to walk away from this deal. I want you to run away from this deal right now. I said, no, man, we want this house. I said, how much is it? He said they want $165,000 for the house and the 5 acres that it's on. I'm like, I want to buy it right now. He said, what? I don't want to buy it right now. He goes, but it's got mold in it. I said, this is not a problem. I said, don't tell him that, but I want to buy this house right now. The bank could not unload it. It was a short sell because the person was going to go and lose the house to the bank. The bank didn't want it because it had mold. The dude didn't want it because he couldn't keep up with it anymore, so we bought it.
You're making me regret so many houses that I didn't buy.
I wish I would have bought more, because back then they were real cheap. Now, this property has
200,
appreciated a whole
300.
bunch. And I went in there, my wife said, well, you take care of the mold, won't you? I'm like, yeah. So I spent 2 weekends over there with bleach, just cleaning it up, and then a couple of places that I sheetrocked it and gone through, I just took the sheetrock out. And then she said, well, I think we ought to put backer board on here. I'm like, why did you make me, I thought to myself, why did you make me clean this whole, we're gonna put backer board anyway. And she said, I think we need to put backer board here. I'm like, okay, fine, we'll put backer board. But I'm ready to paint the house, and I said, okay, what color do you want me to paint it? She goes, oh no, we have to figure out what the floor is first. I'm like, so nothing's happened yet because my wife hasn't decided what floor.
Well,
we're
you
gonna
own
get.
this house, but it doesn't, obviously doesn't look like this.
And the 5 acres that go with it.
That's so awesome.
And the reason I bought it was because of the trees. My real estate, my friend said, dude, the house is in bad shape. I said, yeah, but look at the trees. I said, I would pay the money just for the trees. There's over 200 loblolly pines on it.
It's really hard to find a property that's
You
really
can't anymore.
Established.
Can't anymore.
established and like wooded.
So anyway, I want you to know that I practice what I preach. Now this would not work for everybody because some of you, this thing is really, really powerful. If you would have bought a house like this and then you're asleep one night and you hear your subconscious say, oh, why did you buy that house?
That would be me.
That's a really bad deal, it's got mold in it. And then you start getting sick because you got this thought in your head. The last thing we'll talk about today is lichens. And I'm not talking about the, oh, woo, not that kind of lichen. It's L-I-C-H-E-N. This is a symbiotic relationship between two molds and an alga. The alga produces sugar photosynthetically, and both of the molds protect the alga from being destroyed. Isn't that cool? Mutualistic, a mutualistic process.
So it's a symbiotic relationship between, what'd you say again?
Two different mold species and an alga.
It's always that recipe, 2 molds and an alga.
Hey, and then that's just recent. That was a published paper 1.5 years ago. We always thought it was 1-on-1. It's 2-on-1.
Interesting.
I have the paper if you want to read it.
And multiple examples of different molds.
Good. So ladies and gentlemen, I think, and I've sent you all a video about one of my favorite people in the world. His name is Paul Stamets. He is a big-time mycologist. But the reason, it's not because his research is better than anybody's, but it's because of the constant ideas that he has to allow the fungi to save the planet. And that's what I really like about him. I hope you get to see that, and if you want to talk about it, sometimes we might be able to talk about it in class. But I think you can see that when we think about the fungi, we think about them as both friends and foes, at least I do. Foes because they produce allergies and poisonings and agricultural damage, right? They attack plants. But the benefit to them is they are the big recyclers of nutrients into the world. They form association with other organisms and make those symbiotic relations strong. They produce things like antibiotics and alcohols and organic acids and vitamins and food flavoring and all kinds of different things. And so I think you can see that by our discussion today, that one of the biggest reasons I think that the fungi are so kick-ass is because of everything they do that's good for us. And really, they don't do a lot of bad. Okay? Any questions? All right. So will you please take about 10 minutes and then meet me in lab, and we'll go take care of business there. The lab itself will take about 20 minutes total.